Oh, hey, how's it going? Jeff, the IT guy here. I'm glad to see you. I'm glad you're here on the channel. I love every single one of you all. And today on the channel, on this video right here, don't go just yet. We're going to be answering the most asked and important question that any human being or alien has ever asked, ever. And that is a 4-core or a quad-core CPU good enough for development? And we're not talking about 2 cores. We're not talking about 3. We're talking about 4. All right, just flat 4. No hyper threading, none of that. Just 4 cores. Is it good enough for development? Because that's what we want to know. Here on the channel, we look at IT, we look at development, we look at systems, and we look at how we can use computer hardware to better our lives, to better our jobs, and to be more efficient and effective. And so today, like I said, we're going to talk his 4 cores. And so up for the sacrifice today is going to be a quad-core Ryzen 3 1200. So it's just 4 cores. It is overclocked to 3.8 gigahertz. If you have seen any of my other videos here on the channel, you'll know that this poor CPU gets put through the ringer a lot. And so today we're going to look at it for development. Continuing with the system, it's got 16 gigs of 3200 megahertz RAM. It's on a B450 motherboard. It's got 256 gig NVMe SSD. And it's got a Ryzen Wraith RGB cooler. I mean, none of that really matters, but the RAM and the fact that we have a CPU, quad-core CPU at 3.8 gigahertz does matter. So let's transition over and let's look and see how it does. So here we are inside of the system. This is going through remote desktop to make the least amount of load. So I'm not trying to record with OBS and straight to the disk. It's only got 1 disk in it. And so not having to full with overhead and all that stuff. It's just remote desktop recording to a different PC. But this is Phoronix, and what this does is it records, or not records, but it benchmarks with time to compile, so TTC. And so it runs compilation tests on your CPU to see how well it does. And this CPU, it scores anywhere between the 2nd percentile, which is pretty low, means 98% is better, up to about the 24th percentile, which means that 76% is better. And while that's not the worst, it's not the best. If you're doing heavy, compiling on here, like something, if you're doing, thousands of lines of Java, C#, or another compiled language like C, app development with Android Studio, stuff like that, it's going to take a while. And so this benchmark took over 3.5 hours to run. And so now we're going to switch over to Node. And so we've got Visual Studio Code open here. With Node, this is about 57 lines of code. It's not a huge script. And what this does is it uses the Twitch API to get an OAuth token, pass that OAuth token to another function, and then call the Twitch API again to get the top 20 games that are being streamed at the time that it's ran. And so we'll open PowerShell here, switch to the directory that it's in, and go ahead and run it. And you'll see that you don't need a whole lot of horsepower to be able to run something like this. So if you're doing Python, Node, JavaScript, web development, stuff like that, you don't need a whole lot of horsepower. And this system does really well with that. So you can see it runs, boom. It's quick on the desktop because we're using the NVMe drive. We've got plenty of RAM with 16 gigs. And we're just able to handle all of those tasks relatively easily. I mean, there's no bottleneck at all when doing things like that. And so now we're going to switch over to Android Studio. And Android Studio on Ryzen is a bit of, it takes extra work to get working. And so what you have to do is you have to go into your motherboard BIOS, and you have to turn on SVM, which is Secure Virtual Machine, and you also have to turn on IOMMU. And so you find those two settings, SVM, IOMMU, and you set them to enabled. and then you save, exit your BIOS, start Windows up. Make sure that you have hypervisor and stuff like that on in your Windows features. And then when installing Android Studio, you have to go ahead and make sure that you get the Ryzen SDK as well as the Ryzen hypervisor for Android Studio so that you can actually use the Android VMs. Now with Intel, as you'll see in a video that I do about the i5, the 10400 6-core, is that it's really, you just install it, it works. You don't have to fool with the BIOS or anything like that. And so it's a lot easier to get going. So here you can see the code. This is Java. We're using a Pixel 3 emulated, or a Pixel 3 for the Android VM. This is just a base application, and all it does is it gives like a simple welcome screen. And then so we'll start it up and we'll see how it goes. And so here we go. We're going to start it up. You can see it gives like a little notice here. It's not that big of a deal, but it is slow when you do this. And so now we have to wait for it. So after waiting about 2 minutes, it's finally started up. And here's the application. As you can see, it's very basic. We'll click on the 3 buttons in the top, which is like where you do settings on an Android device. It is really laggy. I mean, it takes some time to be able to do this. It's not quick. It's not fast. It is pretty laggy whenever you do anything else. So imagine if you had a larger app that you needed to deploy, not something that's just a screen, but I mean something, say it had 10, 12 screens, and you were doing a lot of database calls, where you were working with JSON files. There was a lot more UX, UI things, and it had a lot of computations. If it was really doing that, just think of how slow it would be comparatively. And so it'll be pretty slow, actually. So we're going to go ahead and look at the task manager here, because we want to see how it's using the computer resources. You can see with 16 gigs of RAM, it's using 60%, which means that it's using more than 8 gigs. And then you can also see with the CPU, it sits anywhere between like 20, then it'll jump up to 60, then it'll go 80, then it'll go 100. If you do anything inside the VM, it automatically pegs it. And so it just, boom, hits 100% on all 4 cores. The CPU fan spins up. And I mean, it pegs everything about it. And so when you do stuff inside the VM. And so this tells us a couple things. One, it tells us that our CPU is the bottleneck when doing this. And it also tells us that 8 gigs of RAM is not enough to do Android app development. So we're finally seeing the days of when 8 gigs is not enough to do development. You need 16 or more. I do believe I've seen a video of like Linus Torvald was working with the Linux kernel, and whenever he would do compiling, it would use over like 64 gigs of RAM or more. I mean, just massive amounts of RAM when doing the compiling for it. And so the RAM is really, really important when you're working with software development, compiling, things of that nature, as well as your CPU. Your graphics, they don't matter, but really your CPU does, and so does your memory. All right, let's switch over to the camera and let's talk conclusion. So, conclusion time. What have we learned today? And that's really what this video is about. Let's talk about what we have learned. Number one, we learned that you should subscribe to my channel right now. I'm joking, that's not number one, but you definitely should subscribe. So the first thing is we learned that with a quad core, we can do stuff like node development. You can even do like Python development. It's going to be plenty for that, for Python, Node. Even if you're wanting to learn something like Java, C++, C#, even a compiled language, learning it's more than enough, right? Number two, web development. If you're in the market for a cheap web development system and you actually like to build computers, which is a fun thing to do. We talk about it here on the channel all the time. It is a great way to learn about technology. Then you can build something like this for really cheap. You can find a 1200, an AMD 1200 on eBay, maybe $50, $60, something like that. You can even buy new Ryzen processors with an APU. They're like a dual core or something for, you know, 60, 70 bucks. You can buy a quad core 8 thread for around 100. You know, motherboard between, you know, about $60. Get you a cheap case, get you a power supply, which are expensive right now due to the human malware virus. Get you some RAM. You know, you can have a cheap machine. So thirdly, what we've learned is that you probably don't want to use this processor if you're doing application development in, say, Android. So if you're doing Android, you can even, you know, do iOS on computer if you use some of Azure's web service, you know, services and stuff. You can do some iOS development. I would rather do it on Mac though. But you know, if you're going to do app development, like I said, with, you know, using Android Studio on here, you can see, as you've seen in the video, that it does do quite a hit on the system. You know, the VM's really laggy. It takes some time to start up, takes some time to slow down. You start looking at compiling. You're going to run into a lot of time used, which means that you're going to slow down your actual progress. And so in business, time is money, right? So if you're using more time, then you are essentially making less money. If you know, you're paying, so if you can get more stuff done in a short amount of time. So if you charge $500 for an app and it takes you 10 hours, then you effectively made 50 bucks an hour. But if you charge $500 for an app and it takes you 5 hours, then you earned $100 an hour. And so therefore, time is money. The more you can do, the more you'll make. Right, so all that being said, is it bad to have a quad core? No, I wouldn't do professional grade work on it though. But if I was learning, like if you're in college, if you're in high school, or you know, you're an IT professional and you just want something at the house that you can, you know, learn Python or whatever on, then it's a great way to go, right? It's cheap, it's cost effective, it doesn't use a whole lot of energy. You can actually make it into a silent system so that you won't even know it's there. Because there's not a lot of heat involved in it, you can get, you know, a quiet cooler and you'd never know it was there. Put it in a corner, hook it up to Ethernet, remote in, and you can just, you know, learn all that you want to. You can do so many things on a computer like that if it's inexpensive, and you don't have to worry about it, you know, maybe crashing or going down. I would recommend using something like GitHub though, so that you have a repo, so that you don't lose your work. But if you're using the repo, making sure you're saving stuff, then it should be fine, right? And now, there you go. You're a true IT person. You've got a computer in the corner that you remote into. That's, you know, every IT guy's dream, or at least it's mine, is to have something that I can remote into and just lollygag around on. So this has been my video on, can you do development on a quad core? The TLDR is yes, but if you're doing it for a job, or it's more of a professional workload, or it's not just for learning, you're going to want some higher powered hardware. You're not going to want to just use a quad core. If you're maybe freelancing, stuff like that, you're probably not going to want to do it if you're doing app development. If you're doing, you know, web apps, like using PHP, HTML, JavaScript, CSS, not C#, things like that, then yes, go for it. I used a quad core whenever I did freelance web development before I went into Java development, and it worked fine. It was a great way to do it. You don't need a whole lot of system whenever you're doing something like that. So thank you for watching. I hope to see you in more videos. Hopefully this video's out before October 26th. If not, oh well, you know. But if it is out before October 26th, I'll be streaming World of Warcraft Shadowlands here on the channel starting at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I hope to see all of you there. Stay tuned for more videos here on the channel. We've got a PlayStation 5 unboxing and Xbox One Series X unboxing, as well as some of the accessories that go along with it, and we're going to be doing a review of that. There's going to be more computer reviews, more hardware reviews, and more things like this of how to be, you know, how you can actually use systems and how to be techie. Listen, I thank every one of y'all for watching. Go ahead and subscribe, leave a like, leave me a comment, and let me know what you think.